During the final battle of the War of the Last Alliance, Elendil and Gil-galad fought Sauron on the slopes of Mount Doom. Both were killed, but Sauron was mortally wounded in the process. But it was Isildur who handed Sauron his final humiliation, cutting the One Ring from his finger as he lay dying. 2 years later, at the disaster of the Gladden Fields, Isildur would also be dead, and the One Ring would be lost in the Anduin for thousands of years. While Isildur did have some bad luck, and his pride definitely played a part in his death, it still would not have happened without the malice of Sauron. In this video, I explain how Sauron immediately got revenge against Isildur. The disaster at the Gladden Fields, merely 2 years into the Third Age, was one of the most important events of the age. Not only did it result in the loss of the One Ring in the Anduin for over 2,000 years, but it also had a major impact on the fates of the realms in exile, Arnor and Gondor. The death of Isildur and his 3 eldest sons left Arnor in the hands of a literal child, and this child, Valandil, did not claim the high kingship of both kingdoms. As a result, Gondor stayed solely in the hands of Meneldil, the son of Anarion, and both kingdoms went their separate ways, which didn't end well for Arnor. I did a whole video about how Isildur's death ruined everything. But the disaster of the Gladden Fields would not have happened if not for Sauron's actions and his malice, which was present on the battlefield, even if he physically was not. As you probably know, Isildur was attacked by orcs, and those orcs responsible for Isildur's death were mostly from the Misty Mountains. Much of the Misty Mountains had been infested by orcs since the War of the Elves and Sauron. After a dwarven army attacked Sauron's forces during that war, he directed the orcs of the north, reinforced by some of his own servants, to attack the dwarves wherever they could. As a result, the dwarves ended up losing Gundabad and much of the northern Misty Mountains, and the Grey Mountains had become orcish-controlled territory. But not all of those orcs present at Isildur's death were from the Misty Mountains. Some were from Mordor. In 3429 of the Second Age, the War of the Last Alliance started. With Isildur escaping to the north, Sauron knew that the armies of Arnor and the Elves would soon march south to aid Gondor. Now, they could have marched through the Gap of Calenadon, and we're told that at least a part of Arnor's army did, but with the Elves of Lindon and the other part of Arnor's army camping at Rivendell for 3 years, it would have become clear to Sauron that they were intending to cross the Misty Mountains. So Sauron sent what servants he could spare into the mountains. Their goal was to harry and ambush the Last Alliance, and make them pay dearly for the crossing. Except when the might of Lindon and Arnor did pass through the mountains, at the High Pass and the Redhorn Pass, the orcs stationed there were dismayed at their numbers, and decided to hide instead of trying some suicidal attack. So the Last Alliance passed through the mountains safely, and on the other side they would meet the armies of Lothlorien, Greenwood, and Khazad-dûm, and then they marched on Mordor. As for the orcs, they decided to remain in the mountains, still intent on ambushing any groups that they outnumbered. They waited, and waited, and waited. Unknown to them, the war went poorly for Sauron, leading to him being besieged in Barad-dûr and defeated in 3441. We're told that it's unlikely that any news of this reached the orcs in the Misty Mountains, because Sauron had been besieged, and any of his servants that survived fled away into the east with the Nazgûl. The first knowledge they had of the war being over was when Thranduil led his army back to Greenwood. This is where Isildur got unlucky, because the orcs got their ideas mixed up. The army from Greenwood had taken enormous losses during the war. Not only was King Orifer dead, but 2/3 of his army had perished with him, largely due to their stupid rushed attack on Dagorlad. So when the orcs observed this army returning, they assumed that Sauron had actually won the war, and that the elves were retreating to hide in Greenwood. After all, Pyrrhus of Epirus doesn't exist in Middle-earth, so there is no such thing as a Pyrrhic victory. Now, Thranduil's war-scarred army was still too large to attack, but there might be smaller, easier targets soon. Because the orcs believed that Sauron had won, they came to the conclusion that they needed to be bolder in order to win his praise. So, when they observed Isildur's small company moving north, they made their move. Many of them crossed the Anduin and waited in the eaves of Greenwood, while others patrolled the western bank of the river to kill any who might try to swim across. And the rest is history. Isildur's company was wiped out, and Isildur himself was killed by the patrollers on the western bank. So there you have it. Sauron got revenge because those orcs that attacked Isildur were being commanded by his own servants, who had specifically been sent into the mountains 10 years earlier to make the Last Alliance pay for the crossing. While they did not do that, they did manage to catch Isildur on his way back, and part of what drove them was a desire to impress the Dark Lord, who they believed had won the war and would soon re-establish contact with them. You might be thinking, well, this isn't really noteworthy, it's literally actions and consequences. But there is another layer to Sauron getting revenge on Isildur, and that layer comes from what Isildur was carrying, the One Ring. At the time of Isildur's death, the One Ring had only been 2 years removed from Sauron's Black Hand. Although it was swiftly cooling, it was still heavy with his evil will, and even touching it would cause Isildur great pain. And unbeknownst to Isildur, at the time, the One Ring was actively calling out to Sauron's servants as if it were Sauron himself. So when the orcs observed Isildur and his company of knights marching north, they were drawn to him like a moth to a flame. While they had no idea about the existence of the One Ring, they were filled with a desire to destroy the Dunedain and to kill or capture their leader. Once again, you might be thinking, well, that just sounds like orc behaviour, of course they want to kill the Dunedain. But we can actually see the effect of the One Ring on the battlefield. When the orcs attack the first time, they are badly beaten. They leave behind piles of their own dead before the Dunedain shield wall, and inflict barely any casualties themselves. This causes Isildur to resume the march, because he believes that the orcs will not attack again, and will instead only send scouts to shadow the company. And this isn't Isildur being foolish, he's had plenty of experience with orcs and knows that they're mostly cowards who get dismayed when their prey fights back. Except the orcs don't retreat. They reform and attack again, this time enveloping the Dunedain on all sides. The second attack and the change of tactics can partly be attributed to Sauron's servants who were among them, who would have strengthened their resolve and probably had a better idea of how to conduct warfare. But the ferocity of the orcs can only be attributed to the One Ring. They fight with zero sense of self-preservation, hurling themselves at the Dunedain shield wall, using their weight, dead or alive, to knock down a soldier, allowing for their fellow orcs to drag them out of the line and slay them. Although they take heavy losses doing this, it was enough to eventually win them the battle. So while Sauron did send his own servants into the mountain with orders to attack his enemies, this alone did not result in Isildur's death. The orcs failing their first attack so miserably might have resulted in them completely retreating under normal circumstances, but the circumstances were not normal, because the One Ring was present on the battlefield, acting as a beacon for Sauron's servants, causing them to fight with ferocity and resolve far greater than what they normally did. In that sense, it wasn't just Sauron's orders that got Isildur killed, it was his very malice itself, that Isildur had decided to take with him. The One Ring, which he had taken from Sauron, quickly took his life, and thus Sauron had his revenge merely 2 years into the Third Age. And I don't know if there were any instances of vengeance that had a greater impact than Isildur's death. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I originally wrote this script to frame Isildur as being unlucky, with the idea that if he had spent another year in Gondor he might have survived the trip north. The reasons for this, the orcs might have realised that Sauron had lost and dispersed, and that the One Ring might have sufficiently cooled so as to no longer draw in Sauron's servants. But when I finished the script, I wasn't even sure if I agreed with my own argument, so I completely rewrote it as something objective rather than subjective. Anyways, cheers, farewell, and remember, in a roundabout way, you can actually blame Isildur's wife and youngest son for his death because he was going to Rivendell to pick them up.